Anyway, my name is Manuel. I'm a film critic. Manuel Betancourt. I'm a film critic and a culture writer. Thank you all for coming. Woo! I have a bunch of questions, and I'm going to get through a couple of them, but then obviously I want to pass it on to you because I'm sure you have some great ones. But I figured we'd start at the beginning. John, where does the idea for Shortbus come from?
Well, I'd seen a lot of films that had used real sex around the time we were, the early 2000s, and they were interesting sometimes, but they were grim, and the sex was bad. It was depressing, really, and sex can be depressing for sure, but I wanted to do a different kind of film. And I realized there were few actors, most of the films were from Europe, where people are less afraid of sex. But America, we're obsessed with it and we're terrified of it. So I knew a lot of, and movie stars don't have sex, they just don't. So I opened it up to all kinds of people. Like anyone could send in an audition tape talking about an emotional sexual experience. Alan didn't have to. And we chose 40 people from that, and we had callbacks in New York, and it was an unusual situation. We had a good time. We had parties, dances. They watched each other's tapes because I had to see who was into each other. And then we had a lot of improv auditions, and from those improvs I started getting ideas for the story. So we had no story. I started with a cast. We chose 9 people, and then we went into a month-long workshop. We rented a loft in the East Village, and then Peter was one of those 9, and maybe you could talk a little bit about what we did there.
In the loft?
In the loft.
Well, first off, I want to show what I brought, because this was my Shortbus backpack that I pulled out today. This is what I wore the whole movie, pretty much.
What a nerd.
And how dare you? And what's inside of it now, do you wonder? It's a Laserdisc version of Sliver that I bought next door on my way here, so it's still being used. So in that loft, all right, so I remember watching a lot of Robert Altman movies. I remember we painted each other's nails and played trust games and slept over a few times, and then we just kind of worked out our characters and developed them and talked about them, and they slowly but surely became the scenes. It took a long time, years, before we actually started shooting, so we had a lot of time for all of our characters to digest. And when I made my tape, when I saw the ad in Time Out, looking for people, not necessarily actors, right, looking to talk about a meaningful sexual experience, I remember thinking, well, I had been going to sex clubs at the time, and not necessarily participating, but mostly kind of watching from the side, and so I talked about that.
Is participation.
Thank you. And so I talked about that, and it must have, I guess John thought that was interesting. Here I am.
How long ago was that?
This was in early 2002. 9/11 was still really fresh, and of course it was part of the movie, and it was actually, I remember it was February 2002 that we submitted our tapes.
And the blackout was 2003.
Yeah.
Yeah, the blackout. The blackout. Yeah. You've seen 3 blackouts.
I went for 3 of them.
Right, 1923. 77, that was a rough one.
I barely remember it. It was so long ago we did this, really. And what I remembered was it in Brooklyn we rehearsed? A huge...
Loft. Yeah.
Right, and I excused myself at one point because you were doing all these sex scenes. And my son had been trying to call me and finally reached me, and I said, oh, I'm free for a little bit because they're doing all the sex scenes right at the moment. And my son said, oh, Dad, please keep your clothes on. Yes.
Alan's always loved to embarrass his children. That's his whole career, really. And I did my best to really embarrass them. But you didn't have to have sex, did you?
No, I didn't.
Did you want to?
I'm not going to answer that.
He still got his timing. And then Mitch came in a little later in our second round of auditions. I think we met through Murray Hill,
Yes.
who's now on Somebody Somewhere TV show. With our
And
friend
she only goes by the one name.
Bitch, yes.
Bitch. Right.
What can I say? I was 10.5 pounds when I was born. My mom knew what she was dealing with.
I think, Alan, you introduced Bitch to one of your fancy...
Yes, as a matter of fact, I was having lunch with Helen Gardner, of the Gardner Ceramic Museum in Toronto. And we come out to get a bite to eat and ran into Bitch. I don't know what you were doing, whatever you were doing. And so I said, oh yes, this is Helen Gardner of the ceramic. She was created that whole museum. And I said, and this is Bitch. And Helen, who is not used to this sort of thing, said, that's the whole name? Yes, it's Bitch. And she used that the next day at a board meeting. She was president of the board, and she talked about how interesting it was. And she spent some time with me and with her new friend, Bitch. Yes.
Meeting of minds, meeting of worlds, collisions, implosions,
Oh, what?
orgasms. Only one orgasm is fake in this film. If anyone can identify, you get absolutely nothing.
Yeah, I know.
That
One
sounds like a
was
fun
fake.
game.
Well, one that was supposed to be real in the film. There was, of course, Suk Yin is faking it at the beginning,
Right.
but there's one. Does anyone identify? What is the real? You're in it. They have to.
Come on, take a guess.
Anyone want to take a gander?
Oh, come on.
All right, I'll guess terrified.
I'll guess.
Jackson Pollock. Is it JD?
No, that's real cum, baby. What do you think about that? What do you think?
That would have been a hell of a visual effects budget.
Yeah.
He's on the Jackson Pollock painting, the like kind of splatter one.
Yeah. Well, he did cum,
Okay.
but that was fake cum. But he did actually orgasm. And you know, it's funny because his name is Adam Hardman, and he made his own film, a vampire film with some of our cast members. But I was like, so you can come over, you can, if you don't jerk off for a while, you can come over your head. Can you guarantee that? And he could. And he did. And we were in a hotel above 9/11 with him shooting over his head. It almost hit the Jackson Pollock. But then we had to do a little insert shot.
By the way, in the pool, at the early part of the film,
Yeah.
in the pool, that's Jeff Whitty, isn't it?
Yes, this is Tony Winner in the jacuzzi, who wrote Avenue Q. And the other guy's David Pittu, who's a wonderful actor in New York at the Atlantic Theater Company. And then the guy at the bottom of the pool was Mickey Cottrell, famous publicist of many independent films, including Tarnation, which we were part of. And Jonathan Coët, who made Tarnation, had a cameo in there as the guy with the blondies. These are not all for me. God.
But because it was so long ago, the two Pauls,
Yeah,
Dawson and PJ,
yeah.
now, are they still together?
They're still together. They were boyfriends at the time, which was a time saver for me. And they're still together. They've been together 20 years. They're in Florida now. Recognized rarely with new lives. Witness projection is what I call it. So that was a long answer to your
I have a
question.
guess for the fake orgasm. My guess is Severance.
Yep.
Was Sukin.
That was mine.
Yes.
Yep,
It was
that's-
the egg.
that's what I was
That
gonna
was
say.
a fake one.
Oh.
But you know, a lot of the actors were like Shanti, she was the beautiful couple in the sex room that Sukhian looks at and has a moment with. And I said, you know, you don't have to have a real orgasm. She's like, oh yes, I do. Just give me a minute. And she hit me with that orgasm. And at the end, I had a lot of Sukhian, you know, the close-up of the orgasm at the end of Sophia. It was a director's dream because she did 6 orgasms in a row, and I could choose from them. And she's like, I think I'm tapped out. I was like, I said, we'll do one more. You know, you can fake it, and you can tell. I'm a gay man who can tell when a female orgasm is real. Straight men can't do that. They watch too much porn.
Speaking of the vibrating egg, by the way,
Yes.
my friend Robbie, who I came with here today, he suggested before the movie started to have maybe in the future some sort of like William Castle gimmick where the seat could vibrate at the exact time that Sophia's eggs are vibrating, and also maybe like scratch and sniff cards so you really could experience the Sex Not Bombs room.
Which smelled pretty bad.
And you know, like an interactive experience, maybe for the 30th anniversary or something.
When sex has been canceled.
Yeah.
A lot of young people having less and less sex now, and that's why it's good for this film to come out again. You know, they're all a little bit scared of IRL. It's scary. COVID didn't help.
Speaking of this idea that the film is, you know, it's about intimacy, it's about connection, it's about sort of the messiness of people. I was curious how you've seen the film change over time. I watched it when I was in college. Yeah, and the reactions to it. Like, I watched it in college, and I had a specific reaction to it, and I'm like...
What was it?
I think I was awestruck. I had never seen anything, especially in American cinema, that came anywhere close. Especially that first scene. I think you tell us exactly what we're going to be in for. Watching it this week, you know, I'm married. I'd lived in New York. I lived in New York for a decade. It felt different. It felt like seeing an old friend and just sort of learning all of their secrets anew. And I'm just curious how you guys, do you revisit the film? Do you think of the film? Or do people come to you with stories about how they now see the film differently?
Well, how did you see it differently this time, Bitch?
Okay. You know, I hadn't seen it in quite a while. I think this time, I'm like, wow, we were younger. I think the comedy aspect of it really hit me this time, and just like the humanness. And my friend that I brought last night was a huge fan of the film, and as we were driving home, they were like, wow, I didn't even remember how much sex was in it. And I was like, that's a real testament to the emotion and the relationships and the depth, you know, I think, that you're not just thinking of it as like a sex movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What did you think, Alan? That was the first time you saw it straight through, was last night.
Yes. Well,
Why, did you care to see it before? Or you're my friend.
Parts of it. I'd seen parts of it, but yesterday was the first time I'd seen the whole thing, and I was really impressed. I think it was wonderful. Even the part of me, my sex you cut out. Yes, there was.
Did I cut something out of yours?
Yes, I had. You had given me a 15-minute soliloquy. However,
I don't recall that. Alan and I go way back. We met in LA in '87, probably, when I first moved here in '86, and it was a different LA, and Alan and I were in a play at LA Theater Center downtown in the worst play we've ever been in.
Oh, yes.
It was about Chernobyl.
Chernobyl.
We had to do our own radiation makeup. It's low budget. And
I insisted he be in it.
yes, they didn't want to cast me, but Alan insisted.
Yes.
I was playing a fireman. I mean,
I said if they didn't cast him, I was leaving the company. Really, that's a guy. I
that
thought
was
he
the
was
beginning
that.
of our
He was
relationship.
that good.
Aww. I was
So-
just a little punk, you know. I was like 23, and
23.
yeah,
How many years ago was that?
it was 35 or so years
Oh,
ago.
goodness.
You know, we've known each other a long time, and Alan was a good friend of Samuel Beckett and worked with him, and he
Yes.
took us to meet him. It took me to meet him in Paris in 1988, the year before he died, and the experience changed my life. I mean, it really did.
Yes.
What
Well,
a-
it was interesting because I called Beck and told him that I was coming to lunch with a friend. And so he arrived and he brought 2 copies of 2 of his books.
one for me who he'd never
One
met.
for each of us. And so he inscribed it. Usually mine was, which I still have, is Chal and with love, Sam. And
I said, could you do John Cameron Mitchell? And he's like, what?
it,
And he was shaking.
do you need all 3?
It is a lot of
It's a lot
syllables.
of names. But I was reduced, you know, to my essentials by the master. Actually, before that, he was in the middle, he was writing it, and he was like, I'm in the middle, but I can't remember the end. Do you need all 3? And I said, I really don't. But he gave it to me anyway, and he was just so kind, and
Oh, yeah.
I wish he'd seen Shortbus.
Oh,
Would he have liked it?
he would have loved it.
Yeah, he had a good sense of humor, he did.
Yes,
He had a lisp.
He had all sorts of mistresses.
Yes, he was a sex god. Who knew? No, he was a wonderful guy. So this film, you know, we didn't get a lot of pushback when it happened. I was expecting a bit more. I think we were under the radar, pre-social media, pre-iPhone. You know, as you can see, I invented Grindr
And OnlyFans.
and made not a penny. What?
And OnlyFans. That first scene.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, it was like shooting yourself. But again, no money. I always forget to monetize myself. Kids today, you know, they're making up for that though by branding themselves at age 10. And there's a sense of, I'm really glad it's coming out now because there is a kind of panic about sex now, and it's, in the past it was more about Christian religion, you know, religious right, and now there's a little bit more panic on the left, you know, because in the wake of Me Too and consent stuff, a lot of young people are starting to just get really nervous about sex, and it's almost like if any sex is happening, someone's being exploited. You know, and we have a Puritan streak in our culture, and unfortunately I think the rush to fix things that need to be fixed has besmirched the name of sex in general. You know, it's almost like the Andrea Dworkin thing, which is if someone's being penetrated, someone's being hurt. You know, which I have to disagree as I'm being fucked. But it's just, you know, and I was brought up very Catholic, and so I was, you know, sex was a bad thing and queer sex was worse. So this was my own therapy as well, you know, to remind us that sex is part of life. But as you can see, the characters, you know, we think of the film as a relationship. It's front-loaded with sex. By the end of it, it's the last thing you're thinking about. Just like a relationship. But there's deeper stuff. There's deeper stuff going on. And I think it's a good thing to see now when there's a little panic to do anything, to move, to, you know, straight guys are not even sure if they can ever ask a girl out again without crossing a line, you know, and they're not sure what the line is. You know, there's so much tension now about hurting or offending or triggering. This is full of triggers. I love a trigger. You know, I really do. I mean, art is for triggering in the good way. I mean, it's triggering in the bad way too, of course. But in our case, we come from a performance, you know, we were all from the same tribe who made this. You know, there's a Radical Fairy vibe, there's a downtown cabaret vibe. There's, you know, we shot in a place called Dumba, where those type of parties did happen, and was a kind of a lesbian people, you know, lesbians of color community happening at the time that we shot, and many of the women were in the sex room, and so La Tigra had their first gig there. You know, it's all that New York is gone.
It was fun to see the old New York.
Yeah, and that is gone, unfortunately. Maybe.
But
it's
you came
also-
up with all of this. This is more than 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And now you have a film that really needs a much wider distribution, and I hope that's going to happen.
I think so too. I mean, it was never. I mean, it was on DVD. It was never on streaming, which is how people
Right.
watch things now, and it will be now.
Yes, it should be, yeah.
Yeah, it'll be a double vinyl soundtrack. Many of the people in the film made music for it, and a Blu-ray, of course. And Oscilloscope is our great partner. I mean, a great company.
Peter, how about you looking at the film now?
Well, I'm going to expand on kind of what Bitch said, because the humor in it, you know, when we made this movie, it felt like, you know, we were, it was a lot of inside jokes, and we were sort of, when we were developing the script, we were making these jokes, but it didn't feel like, to me anyway, that they were going to be really funny beyond us. So to hear people like laughing at it, and I'm actually laughing at it, I think, more now, because it's fucking funny. It really is. And so that was my biggest takeaway after seeing it yesterday for the first time in a long time. Was that?
We had stuff we had to cut,
Yeah.
apart from the 15-minute soliloquy.
Yeah.
You didn't have a 15-minute soliloquy. You liar! Did not. But Peter's character had a job, and he was the personal assistant of the Bush twins.
This is the W years.
The
you know,
W
remember.
years. He was getting a lot of calls from Jenna and whatever her name was.
So I kept having to like duck behind a door and take a call, like as and then like checking out the sex nut bombs room, but then going and being like, yeah, hey darling, yeah, oh yeah, you can be a model if you want, yeah, sure. You can go to Africa, why not? But then it
You're
just
pretty, you're really pretty.
Well, that's a good example of just kind of an inside joke that we sort of all developed, but didn't really quite work, because no one kind of understood what was going on.
Then
But then,
George Bush
like,
called.
were they going to show up? at
George
some-
Bush called when you're watching them sing into the asshole.
Yeah, and I took a call from the president at that point,
The president's
which
like,
is great, but it just
it's going to be on the Blu-ray, but it's very funny. It's like, this, Mr. President, no, nobody hates you.
You're doing a great job. We believe in you.
So we had a lot of fun making this.
And you can actually see, I just noticed it tonight, like there's a lot of like American flags in my room.
Yes, yeah.
And everything's very sort of preppy. I still have speaking of, I like to collect props for movies. I actually still have a letter that the president wrote to me that I have in my house framed, like, you're doing such a great job, Caleb. Thank you for all you're doing.
It's a fake one, of course.
Yeah, a fake one, of course, but it was hanging in my apartment and sure.
Should we open it up a little bit?
I think so, yeah. We don't have a mic for the audience, so if you could speak up, and then what I'll do is I'll just
It's
repeat
just like 2006.
questions. Yes. Maybe we can start over here. Yes.
Hi. I actually had the great luck of assisting Justin Bond for like 4 months when I was 22 and like a larva. And I actually met you guys at his apartment once. You guys were all so nice to me. I made the worst hors d'oeuvres, but they were so bad. They were like soggy. But I've always thought one of the many things that I think is so imperative and lovely about this movie is that it's like a love letter to so many of the weird performers that were working downtown at that time, because there are so many cameos by other people. And I was just wondering if you could talk about some of the other really amazing performers that you featured.
We tried to squeeze them all in. The Vow Vow sisters are the
Yeah.
ones singing on the trapeze. Murray Hills, swinging on the swing. World famous Bob, who is the blonde.
Amazing.
Sitting with Alan in the Truth or Dare scene. Dr. Donut, Bradford Scobie. He has another character called Moisty the New York Snowman. Got a lot of cigarettes and yellow patches in his snow. Dirty Martini was doing the striptease. So these were all our people, you know. These were the people we loved, and certainly Justin Bond was the queen of us all. Justin's character of Kiki just blew me away, you know, and I had to write something for her. Were you gonna say something?
No, I was just thinking, you know, how far back it was. And at that time, I was just about 80.
He was much younger.
And that's what, almost 15 years ago. And at least I need help getting up the steps. But other than that, I'm still taking tap dancing, so.
Yeah, if anyone's got some roles for him, he's still available.
Yeah.
As long as he's seated for the shooting.
Do we have another question I saw? There were some hands, there we go.
In regards to your, the whole thing was gorgeous, and I love, you had a lot of gorgeous artistic shots, but I was wondering about the cityscape. Like, was that practical?
No, the city was CG. This guy, John Baer, who works on all my films, brilliant animator, and we were going to maybe use the model of New York that's in the Queen's Museum. It's a real scale model, but it was difficult to get cameras and do all the stuff we were doing. So John created this cityscape, and it was unbelievable. And he would paint surfaces and scan the paint and then put it on 3D modeling, so it had that feeling of a real model, you know. And it frames the piece as a fairy tale, you know, a New York fairy tale. That, you know, in a way that, not sure what other film does that, but, you know, it has that kind of Harold and Maude feeling, you know, where it's like, we're having a good time, but there's emotion is deep underneath it, and those are my favorite kind of films. But yeah, John Baer's the guy, and he worked on How to Talk to Girls, Head Big, I think a little bit in Rabbit Hole, but he's also did the Broadway animation for The Origin of Love. He's a great guy.
Right here, yes.
Yeah, I'm just curious. It's such a personal film, and obviously you're using your own stories. How has Shortbus affected, like, doing the film, making the film, and being in it?
Well, I was just a cameo. I am eating pussy in one cameo. Did anyone see me? Thank you. Thank you very much. My mother should have been delighted. But strangely wasn't. I felt safe. Actually, a woman who plays Severin, Lindsay, who's an acting teacher in Boston now, said, "All right, we're doing all this. You gotta do something. You gotta join in. You gotta get fucked up the ass, or you gotta eat you some pussy." And I said, "I'll dine at the latter restaurant. I haven't been there before." And so we asked one of the inhabitants of the space, Jasper, who is a very tall and hot dyke, who was like, "Yeah, I like me some faggots sometimes." You know, a butch lesbian always gets into a little femboy. So she's all like, and I didn't want to do it alone, so my boyfriend is sucking on her titty at the same time. And we're about to shoot, and suddenly she kind of lost her bravado, and she's like, "I'm a little shocked. Not everybody likes what's happening down there." And I'm like, "I'm interested." It's the largest vagina I've ever seen in my life. It's the largest vagina I've ever seen in my life. She said, "You don't have to say it twice." I said I didn't. And I didn't know I was doing it right, you know. I don't know what you're supposed to do, you know, like, no, but eating ass, I don't know, eating pussy, you know, none of this is some kind of a lit up there, and I was like, wasn't sure if it was hard enough. How was I doing it right? You know, was it supposed to get hard like a penis? You know, she was like, faster, faster, and my boyfriend sucking her tits thought he was talking to her, so he's sucking faster, and then it was exhausting. And then it was over, and I had done it. You know, it was like, yeah.
One take? Was it a one take?
One take. And I could say, Sam, where are you going? Is that the last straw? Are you disgusted by heterosexual sex?
No more.
You had it. Okay. What was the question?
Did it change your approach to intimacy or to
I
sexuality?
didn't go back to that restaurant, but I gave it a great rating on Yelp. It loosened me up a little bit, you know. I came of age during AIDS, and it was not a great time to do so. So sex was charged, you know, with life and death, and that helped to move it forward for me, I think. Though my boyfriend broke up with me right after, which plunged me into depression. We're okay now. But, yeah. Alan, did it change you?
Did what change me?
Did making this film change you?
No.
I love your honesty. I don't know what had
I
changed.
knew all about it.
He knew all about it. He'd been doing it for years. I think, you know, what I was annoyed by, it was ahead of its time in many ways. You know, people say Hedwig was too. Hedwig was a flop, you know, in the theaters, and people found it later. Shortbus actually made a bit of money, but it wasn't a smash hit. And I think there was you know, people were still scared of it, you know, and one actor whose kid was in it, I told him it was very explicit, and I invited him to screenings. He never came, then he saw it, and he was offended that his kid was in it with all the sex, and I'm like, oh, come on. You know, it's like, are we really, I'm not against porn, but would you really call this porn? I mean, porn is for jerking off to. The purpose of it is to arouse. This is something else. You know, this is every time you have sex porn, you know, it's complex. You know, sometimes it's interesting, it's boring, it's fun, it's traumatic, it's whatever. It's, you know, sex is just part of life. And it's just one part of life. And it's nothing to be afraid of if we're talking about respect. And, you know, respect is hot, you know. And I was upset that a lot of our actors who were great, it didn't translate to other work for them. And that's what really annoyed me. You know, everyone is so good in this. You know, Suk-yin is a filmmaker, so she ended up, you know, she was acting, and she's an icon in Canada. She's Chinese-Canadian. Chinese-Canadian food is, you know, she introduced me to that. It's incredible. And she almost got fired from the CBC, you know, as a journalist for doing the film. You know, we had to reach out to our friends. Yoko Ono, Francis Coppola, Michael Stipe, Julianne Moore all sent letters of support for the film, and they relented and gave her job back. You know, so you know, it was just odd. So I'm really happy that it's now future-proofed with this 4K.
Nice. Do we have any other questions? Let's go at the back with the hat.
Okay. I saw this when it came out, and what struck me now seeing it again is I don't see all of these people with the ubiquitous cell phone like you see now in real life. I mean, there was I guess it was a BlackBerry or some kind of Palm device that we saw, and then the mini DV tapes, which that's all obsolete technology, but it's just interesting that it exists in that time period when people were still talking in person. And I just wondered if you had anything to say about that, because it's dated, but in a good way. You know what I mean? It shows a time when the internet was around, but cell phones weren't so ubiquitous and people were still communicating.
It was
Yeah.
hard to get online with your cell phone. It was, I think one of the reasons digital technology, digital culture has done a lot of good and a lot of harm. I really believe that we're in this polarized political state because of digital culture, social media, people not talking to each other directly, tweeting at each other. And you can't talk to some young people now and you feel like you're just being tweeted at, and
Or they don't
you're
look
also
at you in the
getting a lot of
eyes.
people watching a lot of internet porn before they have sex. Which I would have done, but it's a weird thing when you finally get to it because, and any number of my straight female friends complain that these guys are just imitating their fucking porn, They do it in the order that they're told. It's like a Marvel movie, when the snarky comment followed by the rim job, followed by the explosion, followed by the fucking, and then the facial. It's just so formulaic. And people are not enjoying it because part of sex, the joy of sex is surprise. Now it's this kind of stock trade. What are you into? This is what I'm into. And it kind of used to be, what are we into? Which might be different from what I'm into with somebody else. And that has disappeared in the negotiation, the transactional thing that sex has become on apps, at least. And guys, tend to be more guilty of that. Because they get very autistic about their sex. They can jerk off and look at an asshole. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't see a lot of women doing that, maybe. But it's, to me, it's a bit of an antidote and a pre-digital respite from that time. But it was starting then, and I was reacting to that then as well. The revolutionary act of being in the same space with people, especially during COVID, is just it's such relief, it just eases tension. And suddenly people aren't panicking about their labels or what they're supposed to be and who's more oppressed than who and therefore has social currency. It's like we're all in this boat together. And that's why the blackout in New York was so beautiful. Everyone felt grateful to be alive. There was no violence. There was no looting. The cops let you drink in the streets and put bonfires in the park for one night. And it was a beautiful thing, and I wanted to capture that. It's possible, it's still possible. And after these COVIDs are over, maybe we can find it again. I'm not sure if we've been stunted. We all know people now who are like, I kind of like not seeing anyone ever again. I'm like, honey, no, I'm gonna get depressed.
Right here.
So a lot of the sex scenes were very emotional and had key emotional points. What was it like working in the emotional parts of those scenes?
Do you want to talk about that, Peter?
Well, I mean, it was never comfortable or easy. It was just a lot of. I actually remember at the very beginning of production that one of the producers just gave me a Viagra. It's like, just keep this in your pocket in case you need it. And I didn't have to use it, but it was. We've been processing this for a very long time. So at that point, we were pretty comfortable with each other. And it would just kind of flow in a way that it felt very it felt like we were friends, just kind of playing around and exploring. And sometimes that became very sad, and sometimes it became hilarious.
Yeah.
I mean, because you would have had to rehearse that quite well. Did he really enjoy that?
Well, the whipping, we got a special whip that didn't hurt. From a S&M expert of making of whips. I said, can you make something that really doesn't hurt too bad? And it worked out. We tried all kinds of things. We wanted, of course, condoms when necessary, and when he was with his wife, it was like we would have seen the condom, though probably in silhouette we didn't know. So she used a female condom. I don't know if you've heard of that. it's a bizarre thing that's just basically a sandwich bag that you put inside yourself. It's not very comfortable.
I remember someone coming to the set with a diagram with a drawing showing exactly how it worked.
Yeah, it was just a baggie.
Yeah.
And so we invented a lot of things, including, we terrified SAG, because we're like, you know, they panic about nudity writers, right? Side ass. And I'm like, how do you feel about fist fucking? SAG. And they were like, their heads exploded. They knew we were trying to make something real, so they didn't want to shut us down. And we had some SAG actors. And in fact, this must not pass these four walls, but they said, look, if you don't tell anyone anything, we'll let you do this without bothering you and let you use the SAG actors. You know, pay them and give them the SAG rules, but just don't tell anyone. So I'm telling you now. They played ball with us. Well, we played balls. And there was a sense of, we're doing something new, you know? I love that. You know, it's like being ahead of the curve, but in a way that's fun. Not just to shock, but to have fun. You know, to break up some scar tissue in culture.
Okay, let's do 2 more questions. Let's do this side. I haven't done this side.
Yes. Soundtrack was amazing from beginning to end. What was it like working with Yola Tango? Was that them in the film? Or him?
No, Yola Tango, Emily Hubley, who did the animation for Hedwig, her sister is Georgia Hubley, who's in Yola Tango. And they're, you know, they're like the longest lasting band who's just cool and family oriented. And, you know, they do their Hanukkah shows at Bowery Ballroom every night of Hanukkah. I often join in. We do Jewish rock songs. Kiss. I read. Neil Diamond. I just saw that Will Ferrell sketch where he plays Neil Diamond doing Storytellers on VH1. He's like, this song is about the night I killed a drifter to get an erection. Forever in blue jeans. You know, it was just like... by the way, I'm playing Joe Exotic. March 3rd, I'm playing the Tiger King. The Tiger King! Well, yeah. It was the most popular thing on Netflix during the COVID, and it's about a crazy gay tiger.
What's the series?
This is a series, yeah. That's the thing I did in Australia.
Yeah.
And Kate McKinnon's playing Carol Baskin, that bitch. And it's gonna...
Filming in Australia?
Yeah, we were in Brisbane all last summer. Mm-hmm.
And how was that?
It was fun. It was fun. It was great to work there. There was no COVID. It was, you know, warm. There was no traffic. And I didn't have as much fun acting since Hedwig, or really ever on screen. Doing Hedwig wasn't much fun because I was directing. But I had a blast. And they let me, rewrite stuff. And, I had a blast. And I talk like this the whole time. And I'm from where he's from, and I'm weirdly the same age. But he saw a picture of me as Joe, and he posted, "John Cameron Mitchell make me look like a flaming fag." Whereas I'm just a hard-working gay male. My response was the painted nails emoji. I mean, it really humanizes him. He's actually going to be very happy.
Let's do one final question. I feel this is going to be torture, but let's do it right here in the front. Yes?
Was it a artistic or otherwise reason or choice that some people use in actual names like Bitch and Spawn versus character names?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've never dropped Bitch, but yeah, why would some people...
Well, you must have said you want to be called that, because everyone got to name themselves.
Yeah.
So much of what we were doing was just hanging out. So it just felt natural. You know, Justin was like, yeah, I'm gonna call up me. And, you know, a lot of people are playing kind of versions of themselves. So we didn't really care so much. Weirdly, there were 2 actors that I cast that were the youngest. And they were the only characters who didn't have sex in the film. And I encourage people not to hook up off camera, you know. I couldn't enforce that, but these 2 young people did. And just as I suspected, you know, suddenly one of them wasn't texting back quickly enough and someone was hurt and they both dropped out. I mean, they were both 20, so they, you know, that's what happens when you're 20. And, but I was just like, please don't fuck unless it's in front of me. You know, which is a weird thing to say. And generally they didn't. You didn't? No. I mean, Paul and PJ, of course, were together, so. But Sophia, Sukian, and Raf really were not into each other by the time we shot. But they bit the bullet and did the scene. I mean, doing a sex scene is just as difficult as a crying scene. You mean, people go, how can you stay in character and have sex? I'm like, well, how do you cry and stay in character? It's just life, you know, you just do it. And it had its own, you know, pressures, the sex scene, but just as hard as the fight scene or the crying scenes, you know. Clear the set, we're having a sex scene. But thank you so much, guys, and please tell your friends. It's going to be out on Blu-ray, and weirdly we couldn't find a theater to run it here as a real run. LA, capital of film. I think it's, you know, whatever, it's fine, because most people will see it on streaming and Blu-ray, but in other cities it's going to have short runs in different theaters. So thank you for coming, and thank you so much for moderating.
Yeah, let's give everybody